In this session, we're going to talk about a glass manufacturing company that we were able to identify over $100,000 their first year in refunds and credits on their telecom expense management services. This company manufactures glass not only for cars, but also for buildings. They operate globally, and they also have over 200 retail locations as well. This company hired RadiusPoint because they knew that they needed to have their invoices audited to identify errors that were on the invoices. And they also needed assistance with ordering services because the 200 locations, over 200 locations nationwide, were able to call the vendor, order whatever services that they needed. So whatever phone lines, long distance, cellular. And so they had no visibility, corporate had no visibility in what the locations were doing. They were very decentralized. And so corporate needed to get their hands around this, and that's what they hired RadiusPoint to do for them. The issue was the spending levels at the locations. Some locations were much higher than others. And so just by looking at their cost center allocations, they knew that giving each location the autonomy to go out and order their own services, that they were not getting the best deal. They had no economies of scale either because they had no corporate contracts. Everybody was doing their own thing. And so they needed help with getting their hands around this. So RadiusPoint was hired initially to do an audit, a one-time audit, to identify all of the inventory, all of the services, identify all of the lines. And so with that audit that we do, we of course ask, is the service under contract? And that's where we identified that the locations, they may have the same vendor, and in many cases they did have the same vendor, major vendor, but they were all under different contracts. We came back to the client to show them that everyone had done their own thing and they all had their own contracts. If we were able to consolidate this, they would be able to cut 20 to 35% off of their invoices by consolidating that and getting that under one corporate contract. So there were a lot of other things that we've identified with the audit that we did for the client. First of all, of course, was the overspending that was occurring at the locations, but then giving the locations the ability, there was no workflow process in place to order services. And so we were able to assist the client with setting up a specific workflow so that if a specific type of service was needed, they would have to follow a certain process and get specific approvals for that. Not only was it a cost savings for reducing the cost, getting corporate contracts, global contracts in place, but it was also a method of giving the granular detail to the corporate office of here's what each location has, and here's how we can streamline each location to be the same, because all of the over 200 locations were all the same, basically a cookie cutter approach. However, the services were completely different for the money that they were spending at each location. One of the things that was very curious about their location was the call forwarding services that they had at each one of their locations. So if a location closed, they would remote call forward that line to another location so that they would continue to keep that phone number. We identified at one location that there were 6 call forward lines coming to that location. So basically 6 different lines coming to them from another location that had since been closed for years. And they were spending about $67 per remote call forward for those lines that were no longer being used, which we verified that the lines were not being used. No one was calling those lines, but yet they were still paying $67 times 6 for those services on a monthly basis. Part of the services that we did provide was gathering all of those contracts for the different services, validating expiration dates, of course, and then negotiating with in a corporate manner so that the one vendor would fold all of those contracts together so that they would end coterminously, but then also giving discounts, because going to, adding services to a corporate contract, you always want to make sure you get some additional discounts to reduce the cost. So we did do that and basically streamlined everything that they had, all of the different services they had under one corporate contract, or if another vendor had to be consulted, that vendor as well, but all corporate contracts. So in year one, we had over $100,000 in savings for this particular client, and it involved getting refunds and then also consolidating the contracts. And then on another note, they did sign with us to continue this on a monthly basis. So they signed up for the telecom expense management services because they knew how quickly this would get out of hand if they were to let the locations continue on with their ordering process. So we set up the ordering process with our MACD portal, which is moves, adds, and changes disconnects. And so any orders, future orders, had to go through our portal, and we would place those orders, make sure that they were placed under the appropriate contract with the appropriate contract rates. So their ROI, which we calculate this for each client on a monthly basis, and their ROI has been over 200% on a monthly basis. So they're continuing to save money, not just soft dollar savings from how we're assisting their accounts payable and their telecom department, but then also for refunds and errors that we're finding on the invoices.